My name is James Jarrow. I am a second-year computer science major at the University of Central Florida, and this is going to be my second application assignment, the inventory list. First off, I want to show that I can perform the Git Clone Command properly. So what I'm going to do, I have my privatized GitHub here. That will be privatized GitHub repository. That will be private until further specified. Please see the comments in my submission for more details. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to create a new file. And we're going to call this demonstration. And what I'm going to do is git bash. And then we are going to type the command git clone, paste the link, wait for this to finish. And now that it's done, we're going to close out git bash. And we are going to open as an IntelliJ project. I'm just going to, and while I'm waiting, I'll discuss what my structure is like. The reason, as you'll see later on, my structure of my project is very similar to that of project 1. I was heavily inspired by it since it worked out, basically since it worked out last time. I don't see why I couldn't keep the same format as the last project. So I basically transferred over the format of the last project to this project with a couple extra changes as needed to implement a couple features. So the first thing you'll see is my README, which is the user guide that I provided. Unlike last time, I did not put this as part of the application, but rather as part of a README file, which still accomplishes the same goal as last time. So now we're just going to load our Gradle build, trust the Gradle project, and then let the program run from there. And while that is going on, I will continue discussing the format of what my structure looks like. So here, as this opens, this is my my UML diagram that I have. As you see, it reinforces the same structure as last time. I tried to keep the idea of a single function to each, single purpose to each function. So really, each class only has one function. There are 3 controller classes: inventory, add item, and edit item. There is the main class, inventory management application, that will launch the program itself. And then there's the scene manager, which I use so that all 3 controllers can transfer data at a reasonable rate and effectively so that no data is lost. Inventory is just getting or simply get and set methods that set and get the names, the serial number, and the value of an item respectively. Inventory object stores all these items into a list of type inventory, and then I have 2 get methods, set, get, and set, which do the same things as the inventory, but getting a list of items and setting them. Inventory list puts these into what we call an observable list, so I can track the changes of anything that goes on in it, and then an edit index, so that I can keep track of the index that the user wants to edit for edit item controller. And just to keep a heads up on this, it seems that our Gradle build has finished, so as soon as that's finished, we'll go to that. But going back to the UML diagram, there's also some get methods and some set methods as well in there. Or again, same idea, but instead you're getting the item of observable, which is observable list, and setting that, and then getting the index type and setting it to a specific type, a specific integer. In this case, sorry, my bad. You have the validator class, which checks that each part of the item's description, so in other words, the name, the serial number, and the then the value are correct. And then the serialization, which handles saving and loading as different types of files, which were TSV or text files, HTML files, and JSON files as specified by the requirements. So now we are going to pull up our main class. I'm going to open up the main class, and I now need to set up SDK so I can run everything. Now it'll finish up, and now I'll be allowed to run as normal. But before I do that, I should go into in-depth about, first off, the test cases. I created 5 test classes, one for add item controller, or one for each of the controllers, and then one for serialization and validator. And all the other classes are simply set or get methods, or in the case of inventory management application, it is simply a start and main method, which you cannot test. So here's our add item controller test, and just to show that this works, excuse me about that, we're going to go to our Gradle, and then we're going to go to test, and then I'll let Gradle run its process. Please ignore all the errors on here. I have already ran this before, and these will work fine. So as you see, all my tests have passed. No test has failed. And just to show that it's not a fluke, we're going to do this with edit item controller. Again, run the test. As it instantiates, I'll give it time to do its thing. And again, you see it passed. Running inventory. And as a side note, if code gets looked at more, inventory controller test only tests the remove item, because adding and editing items are done specifically by add item controller test and edit item controller test respectively. So all that inventory controller test should do is test if I can remove an item. So this works. My serialization test to test that I can save and load files. It passes as well. And finally, the validator test. Again, please ignore all these red marks. I was unsure about what to do with them, but when I tested this out, they still ran perfectly. So I'm just going to assume that it's nothing significant. It might be a wrong assumption on my part, but since my program is not getting flagged for error or having my compiler scream at me, I am going to assume that everything runs normally as intended. And as you see, it does. So all 5 of my tests work. So now going back to my main class, I'll show you each of them. So here's my main class, which is the inventory management application. It has one purpose, and that is simply to test, not test anything, but simply just launch the GUI. In this case, the main GUI, which is inventory controller. And when I hit run on the application, it'll launch the GUI, the inventory controller GUI. Next up, I'll go to Validator, which as I said before, it tests all the tests. The methods here are simply testing that any user input is valid, testing if the serial number is valid, checking if the name is valid, if it has the correct length, if it has the correct value, if it's a unique serial number, etc., etc. As you can see, I go through all the processes. I check if it's a digit or a letter. At any point, return false in this method. If it's not true, check if it's a unique serial number, check if it has a valid name range, check if it has a valid value, etc., etc. This is what my validator class is specifically handling, simply handling all the methods itself, the methods to check if user input is correct. Next up is serialization, and serialization is simply to handle loading and saving for the different types of files. So here I have two main methods which call other methods in here, save and load. Load is down in the bottom, but save has three methods. It's called save TSV, save HTML, and save JSON, depending on what the user wants. And the same thing can be used for load TSV, load HTML, and load JSON. Each of these handle their respective file types accordingly. Scene manager is so that I can talk, so that my controller classes can quote unquote talk to each other, basically transferring data from one to the another without it being lost. Inventory object is storing the inventory items of type inventory item into a list, and then setting and getting that list respectively. An inventory model makes sure has a similar purpose, except now I'm storing them into an observable list, and I'm also creating an edit index that my edit item controller will use to keep track of what I want to edit, and this is so I can keep track of the changes that are occurring. Inventory item simply sets and gets any valid user input, so any parts of the input that are valid, the inventory item will handle. So setting the name, setting the serial, setting the value, and then getting those parts respectively. And then my inventory controller is the main FXML controller. This is the one that gets launched. It has a variety of functions. So it has if I want to add an item, it opens a new controller which opens up the add item. If I want to remove an item, I simply click on the item and remove it. If I want to edit an item, it calls another controller called edit item controller. If I want to save quick, it calls the serialization methods needed to save the file and load the file if needed for load quick. If I want to close it, there's a method called close which closes the GUI. Finally, add and edit item I will do together because they are simply the same thing, really. All that it is each of these are two separate controller functions that are called when the user wants to either add or edit. And here they can add an item, and what will happen is when this is clicked, the user will input any data that they want, and then depending on whether or not it is valid, as in check based on this method here, it will add the item or edit the item respectively, depending on which controller. So with that said, let's launch the GUI. So running this GUI program. Here is my main inventory manager GUI. So here you see a table view with three columns: value, serial number, and name, or not columns, rows. I apologize. I'm exhausted. But yeah, these are, and then if I want to add item, I click add item. If I want to remove an item, I can remove an item, and I can edit an item that is selected. I will save this for part 2 of my video. I have to split this into 2 videos due to technological constraints, but I will pick up here with part 2.